Good evening. I'm Steve Horan, ShelterBox USA Board Chair. I want to welcome you to our third annual virtual benefit, an evening to experience ShelterBox. During tonight's program, we'll take you to the front lines of our emergency responses around the world. From Ukraine to Haiti to the Philippines, you'll meet some of the families whose lives have been transformed as a direct result of your generosity over the past year. Without your generous support, none of this would be possible. We hope you take great pride in your role of enabling this life-saving work. Thank you for being here this evening.
Good evening. I'm Carrie Murray, and it's an absolute privilege to serve as president of ShelterBox USA. Thank you for being here for our third annual virtual evening to experience ShelterBox, while we highlight 23 years of providing life-saving shelter to families who've been displaced by the world's worst disasters and conflict zones, all because of you. I am so grateful tonight because we have people calling in, not only from all over the country, but from all over the world. We will bring you 1 hour of inspiration, and I hope that you will join us in the chat. So in the lower right-hand portion of the screen, you'll see a chat box. Please chat throughout, ask questions, engage with us. And on the lower left-hand section of the screen, if you are so inspired, please pledge or make a donation. And I am just so grateful because we learned yesterday that we have an anonymous donor on the line who is matching gifts tonight up to $100,000. Thank you so much. As a global humanitarian relief organization, ShelterBox is working to tackle one of the biggest issues plaguing our world today, and it's this massive displacement of people. There are more people than any time in recorded history that are displaced from disasters, from conflicts, and from the impacts of climate change. Currently, ShelterBox is responding all over the world to some of the biggest crisis situations, from the war in Ukraine, which has displaced a third of the country's population, to the devastating monsoon flooding in Pakistan, which has left 33 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. We also are working in the Horn of Africa and the drought in East Africa, which has the region on the brink of famine. In addition to this work, ShelterBox continues its long-term protracted crisis work in places like the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, and also in Syria, where we have been responding for the last 11 years. Shelter, we believe at ShelterBox, is a basic human right. And I believe every person tonight can really relate to how important your home has been over the past 3 years during the pandemic to your safety and the well-being of your family. ShelterBox got started 23 years ago, and we were founded by volunteers. They were part of a global service organization called Rotary. And what was happening in our world at the time is that there was a massive displacement of people in India and Pakistan from the Gujarat earthquake. Our founders wanted to focus on the basic needs that people have. And our basic needs are food, water, and shelter. They focused on the provision of emergency shelter and essential supplies to set up household when you lost your home. The basic premise is, what are the things that you do need to sustain your life? The center of gravity for what we do at ShelterBox is the provision of an emergency shelter. It takes many shapes and sizes. It's often a family emergency tent, and that will serve as the place that a family will call home when they've lost their home in a disaster. But the other things that are so vital are things like basic light. So often you've lost power, so we include waterproof solar lanterns. You've often had contamination of the water source, so we include water purification units, containers to store clean water. Aid organizations bring in food and water, but what are you going to prepare a hot meal? Boil water, restore a sense of routine through meals with a family. So we include a whole stainless steel cook set, as well as waterproof ground mats, blankets, tools, even mosquito nets. One box will serve one family, and one box is $1,000 delivered. So I'd like to take you inside the family emergency tent. This is one of the shelter solutions that we provide at ShelterBox. This here looks like a camping tent. It looks like a recreation tent. It is not. This is the place that a family will call home. It's made for humanitarian purposes for ShelterBox. This, as you can see, is a double wall tent. And this can withstand heavy wind, rain situation. A family will live in this tent for a period of weeks to months after losing their home. You can see inside this tent, which can hold, we've seen 6, 8, up to 10 people. You have areas to create rooms. So here's some privacy screens. This is our mosquito net. And then what you see is where people will gather. So basic things like waterproof ground mats, blankets to get a bit of sleep, your water purification unit, the cook sets, the basic tools and materials that people need to set up household. And what we know is having a shelter is the first step in the recovery process when you've lost your home in an emergency. Now, in addition to the standard relief tent, ShelterBox deploys a whole range of different tented solutions depending on the environmental situation that we're going into. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We are really working to customize the approach based on the unique needs of the families we're serving. One of the ways our organization has been really having better scale and more impact across the world is through our low-cost, high-impact options called our shelter kits. These shelter kits, as you see here, inside contain tarpaulins, and they contain the tools and fixins that can repair a home that's been damaged, like you see in Ukraine right now with the bombing, but it can also create a single room structure, like you see here. This will be home for a family that has lost their home in an emergency. We use these often in places like the Philippines. We're using them currently in Ukraine. And as you can see, we often supplement locally other resources that people will need to build their home. So we could be procuring corrugated iron for the roof, basic framing and timber, resources that are plentiful in the communities that we're serving. So in addition to the tents, the tarp solutions, ShelterBox also has a variety of other solutions that we are really innovating to help bring and meet the unique needs of these situations. One of those items are the Sahelian tents, which we are using in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has had some of the highest waves of displacement in our world, and we are providing durable solutions that will last longer in extreme environments. That also includes places like Syria. We're piloting the tent leveling project, which is gravel, it's sand, and it's a heightened base that you'll put the tent on to help prevent flooding from entering into the tent. In addition, we're using iron net solutions in places like Yemen, where the environmental situation is so extreme that the tents might only last a period of weeks. So we're doing very unique, innovative ways and solutions to help really reinforce the solutions we're providing globally. So there's many types of shelters that we provide, but the purpose is always the same. It's to really provide a place to call home to enable the self-recovery of the families that have been displaced. COVID has put an extraordinary pressure on our organization over the past 3 years, but never in our history has the work of ShelterBox been more important than during the COVID pandemic. So often refugees are left in collective centers, overcrowded evacuation centers, and they don't have a way to mitigate the spread of the infection. So our work's been increasingly important. We've had to adapt over and over again to meet the unique needs, from adapting the kit to include things like soap and hygiene items, to including PPE like sanitizers, masks, gloves, to even altering the ways in which we deploy, which is oftentimes now we are doing remote training on Zoom. So we are committed to continuing to respond. And actually this year is one of our biggest response years in ShelterBox's history. Over the last 23 years, ShelterBox has brought emergency shelter to over 2.5 million people in over 100 countries, including the U.S., across 300 disasters and crisis situations. Some major milestones and some of the big highlights of our responses include the Indian Ocean tsunami, Every single one of those boxes will represent one family that's been served by the organization. We've also worked extensively in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake that left 1.5 million people homeless in an instant. We've worked with Hurricane Harvey in Texas, which displaced hundreds of thousands, across the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, some of the poorest countries in the world, as well as in Syria. And Syria represents the longest and largest piece of our work, where we've been responding to the crisis for over 11 years. Our work in the world's most extreme conflict zones is the reason why in 2018 and in 2019, ShelterBox was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. So how do we do it? Really, the power of partnership is what makes the work of ShelterBox possible. We never go it alone. Our longest partnership has been with a global service organization called Rotary International. Rotary has been absolutely instrumental in helping us mount our responses, particularly our natural disaster responses. And it's actually local Rotarians on the ground who are sending information back to ShelterBox. They're helping with the logistics and supply chain, and they do so much to advance the work of ShelterBox. ShelterBox remains the official project partner of Rotary International in emergencies. In addition, ShelterBox coordinates with many other organizations. We collaborate with the United Nations and the Shelter Cluster. We also work with groups like Habitat for Humanity, the Red Cross, as well as lots of local NGOs that we partner with on the ground. One of the ways that ShelterBox has really been able to scale our work over the past 23 years is through our base of volunteers called the SRT, the ShelterBox Response Team. When we were founded, we created a disaster relief training program whereby we harness volunteer service and we train some of the most highly trained and finely skilled people in all of emergency response. They sign up to become a frontline first responder. They go through about a year of training. 1 in 30 people will make it through the program and become a ShelterBox response team member. They deploy in teams in any wave of the response, from the initial boots on the ground assessments, to doing beneficiary selection, to coordinating with local agencies and folks on the ground, train the trainers on how to construct the aid, to even doing monitoring and evaluation. These response team members really help the organization go the distance, and it's how we're able to be so many places at once, responding across the world. I'd like to give you some highlights of our current work. Right now, we're responding in Pakistan, and we deployed a response team immediately after this severe monsoon flooding. It's devastated the country. We've heard reports that there are 33 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. We immediately deployed the team to Islamabad, and in the past several weeks, we've deployed thousands of shelter solutions, from tents to tarps, mosquito nets, water purification, and lights. And we will continue to respond to that devastating catastrophe in Pakistan. We are also working across the Horn of Africa, where we have been responding to disaster and conflict situations. We've worked extensively in Ethiopia, that has been the center of gravity for a massive displacement due to the Tigray crisis. And we've also been working now on a new project in Somalia, which we're seeing nearly 1 million people displaced and a country on the brink of famine. At last year's event, we had been beginning to mount a response to the earthquake in Haiti, which hit in late August of 2021. Many of you responded, and you enabled us to mount a very significant response in the island nation of Haiti. It's a country that we've worked in several times before, most notably the 2010 earthquake. We've brought emergency shelter to hundreds of thousands of people over the years. And in 2021, all of you answered the call. And over the course of the last year, we've been able to bring emergency shelter and household supplies to over 10,000 people. I'd like to take you now to the front lines of that response in Haiti and have you meet one of the survivors, Claudette.
font une secousse, je ne sais pas qu'on dit tout, et puis qu'on y a là même, pendant qu'on commence à tomber, et puis qu'on y a un peu courir, mais comme déjà. Je l'ai la terre quand moi crasé. Oui, mieux qui tombé. Oui, après tant de terre fin passé, te gen un cyclone qui vient passer, on est obligé quand il a crasé, nous obligé rester dans de l'eau parce que bagala a toujours continué à passer, nous rester dans de l'eau là, c'est là que une solution pour nous rester. On est là, des jeunes jeunesse là qui te fait un cadeau, brûle là, te bon mon kit, on brûle là là-dedans, on est là, moi baril. Moi j'ai une tasse là-dedans, moi j'ai une assiette, moi j'ai un couteau, moi j'ai une pierre bois, moi j'ai une lampe, moi j'ai une louche. J'étais tellement la nécessité, je me sentais satisfait parce que bis moi écrasé net, c'est apprendre, c'est ça qui vient remonter, qui m'a force qui vient remonter. Et quand l'état fin passé, la pluie, c'est grâce après là ça qui fait une protection, je viens côté me coucher. Tout est très nécessaire, tout ça pour moi. De nécessité ça qui était bien arrivé. Et bien recevoir. Je me senti content pile parce que la belle a crasé business moi, je pas soigner. Je pas soigner, qu'on a assez pas moyen l'argent ça, me reprendre activité là. Et ce que me fait manger cuit. Et me vendre produits alimentaires, du riz, de l'huile, du bail. M'acheter cabrit touyer, m'acheter mouton touyer, m'acheter poisson. Pour restaurant. Avec 15 000 gouttes ça me déclaré reprendre business là parce que business a failli, me reprendre ni mettre le sous pied. Je dis même l'aime pas un grand minimum, j'en téye même quelque chose. Je me sens satisfait. Et c'est grâce à l'institution ça. Bon, je senti une joie. La joie qui déborde sur moi parce que on bagaille me pas même espoir même pour dans circonstances je senti très satisfait. Et me remercie l'instance là en pile. Oui, toute équipe qui a entouré qui vote message pour moi yo. Je remercie en pile.
Thank you for helping make Claudette's recovery possible. While ShelterBox is best known for our work in disaster situations, earthquakes, flood situations, the fastest growing piece of our work has been a result of violent conflict. And actually, conflict is driving the majority of global displacement. Places like Ukraine, where ShelterBox has been mounting a massive response since the airstrike started in late February. I was part of the first team that went to the border of Ukraine. We were working in Poland, in Krakow, and I was stationed down in Przemysl at the first train station over the border. At Przemysl, what I saw on those platforms every day was 20,000 people arriving, mostly women, children, elderly, and disabled. People who had been displaced and left everything behind. Because of the Ukraine crisis, we've seen over 14 million people who've been displaced, 7 million internally displaced, and another 7 million refugees. So ShelterBox arrived on the ground to begin coordinating and really determining how we were going to help the very unique needs of the different displacement populations. We had both internally displaced and refugees. Over the course of several weeks, we established 3 different programs. One was to help people who were internally displaced, people who were fleeing the violence in eastern and northern Ukraine and moving to western Ukraine towards Lviv. Many of these people were sheltering and sleeping in schools, in churches, in train stations, and on the floor. So we have provided thousands of mattresses to bring a bit of comfort to the families that are internally displaced. We also have seen that there are many people who have not left their homes despite the bombing. And so we wanted to provide a solution to help people who needed to temporarily repair their homes that had been affected by the bombing. So we provided thousands of our shelter kits to help temporarily repair so they can shelter in place. In addition, we've provided them with solar lights, high thermal blankets, hygiene kits, basic things to sustain their life while they're caught in the chaos. And then finally, we turned our attention to the poorest and most isolated country in Europe, and that's Moldova, where we saw thousands of women and children, many staying with host families, just trying to make the basic needs met. So we've been providing hygiene kits, as well as multi-purpose cash allotments to help people access basic things like food and medical care. So while many are still refugees, we have seen many people also returning home to reconnect with their families, access resources, and begin this very long process of recovery. I would now like to take you to the front lines of the crisis of Ukraine and share with you the courageous stories of 3 women who are working to rebuild their lives.
Я сейчас заплачу. Хочу, чтобы был мир на нашей земле вообще, чтобы не было войны. Потому что не дай Бог такое перенести.
Тут был большой красивый дом. Большой, красивый, не такой, как вы видите сейчас. Он был высокий, нарядный. Я в этот дом положила 25 лет своей жизни. 5 лет – это моя жизнь вся.
Попал с минометного снаряда. Получается, ну это как мне очевидцы говорили, потому что мы выезжали во время, так уже когда тут было пекло, выехали в Черновцы. С миномета уже в последние, здесь получается, я 30-го позвонила числа, сказали, что уже, ну, попало, развалило.
Оце перший снаряд спочатку влучив в угол. І зразу вибило всі вікна, трусануло хату. Вікна, двері повилітали, штукатурка, ну ще була криша ціла. А вже коли ми повернулись, тут вже нічого не було. Це все зруйноване.
Очень хорошо там, где дали накрытие, вот эти вот тенты. Почему? Да, потому что уже когда есть на что класть, мы уже можем на всякий случай где-то защищаться от дождя. Это здорово.
Вот закрыли, пожалуйста. Так что брезент в нашем, вот в моем именно нашем случае очень надо.
Зрозуміло. Який у вас план дальнішого і вашої сім'ї, що ви будете далі робити?
А что? Отстраиваться, жить дальше. Другого выхода нету. Никуда уезжать.
Our work at ShelterBox in Ukraine is far from complete. Right now, we are actively working behind the scenes on our customized winterized packages. We're working on what we believe will be a brutally cold and uncomfortable winter. We're going to be providing everything from children's clothes to high thermal blankets to coats to basic things like solar lanterns and even stoves this winter. We anticipate responding to the Ukraine crisis for many months, if not years. The way in which ShelterBox responds effectively and efficiently in disasters is because we are a model in pre-positioning. We pre-position aid all over the world in strategic hubs that we draw down on when emergencies happen. That's what we did actually in Ukraine. We had aid pre-positioned in a warehouse in Belgium that we were able to truck in addition to procuring other aid items from around the world. But at ShelterBox, I don't think that there's been a better sign that we have the strategy right on pre-positioning than when you look and turn your attention across the world to our work in the island nation of the Philippines, one of the worst and most impacted countries in our world by natural disasters, also known as Typhoon Alley. Last December, Super Typhoon Rai, a Category 5 equivalent, devastated that island nation. From southern Leyte to Bohol to eastern Samar, it left 10 million people affected. There were 7 million people who lost their homes and nearly 2 million homes that were damaged or destroyed. One of the amazing things that happened to us during this period of time is that we were able to leverage ShelterBox Operations Philippines. After Super Typhoon Haiyan in 2014 and 15, we established ShelterBox as a local registered nonprofit in the country of the Philippines. We have a warehouse in Cebu. We have a small amount of paid staff, as well as many volunteers that help mount a response when disasters happen. We have responded dozens of times in the Philippines. Over the past year, we have been able to have one of our largest natural disaster responses in our organization's history because we were ready, and that is because of you. We have brought emergency shelter to over 100,000 people who were displaced from Super Typhoon Rai. I'd now like to take you to the front lines of that disaster and have you meet Violetta, who is one of the beneficiaries that your support has been able to impact.
Wala ang atop, anak ba? Tingnan kay sa nga tanan, nga tumba diri ang amo ang mga kuan sa nalipay oy. Nalipay yun nga naanay ka ng kuan ba? Tanan tarpulin ang tanan kapal. Nalipay yun kay sus makaatop na gyud mi. Naan makaatop na gyud. Nakatabang sa amo ah. Nakatabang. Nakatabang sa amo ah. Nga agihikot ang kuanan mo tarpulin dito sa lubi, kuanan sa PC, ang suga sa gabi kuanan mo ipa grade 7. Nya katong isa o kay ni undang man karon. Kuwi siya papa. Nangandoon sa mi nga mahuman ni among balay. Mahuman among balay nya maka
nganong naa ni siyang burot-burot kay mura na siya mo act as mo.
They can't afford buy.
At ShelterBox, one of the quietest but one of the most deeply compelling pieces of our work is in the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, also known as the Forgotten Crisis. There has been a massive wave of displacement across the region. Many are refugees from Nigeria fleeing Boko Haram violence. And so many people find their way to the border of Cameroon. ShelterBox has been working extensively in a refugee camp in Cameroon called the Minuau Camp. Originally established for 10,000 refugees, there are now over 70,000 people that are sheltering in the camp. When you become a refugee, on average, you are displaced 17 years. Our work at the camp is very significant because ShelterBox remains the only provider of tents to new arrivals at that camp. And many of these arrivals are women and children. Of the people displaced in our world today, 75% are women and children. And so many of the Nigerian refugees wind up at the Minnewaw camp. When you're a refugee, you're typically taken, as you're processed into the camp, you're held in a transit center, a collective center. These are typically overcrowded and they could take weeks to process you through. But the one thing that is instrumental in really changing your life and starting your recovery is receiving your plot of land from the government and your ShelterBox tent. And we've been working for years to provide tents and essential household aid items to people who are newly displaced within the camp. It is the first step in their recovery process so that they can start working and kids can start going back to school again. In addition to helping the newly displaced, ShelterBox has also been responding to help the long-term displaced within the camp because they are there for many years. One of those families is Kaltumi. I'd like to take you now to the center of gravity of our work in the Lake Chad Basin, to the Minnewaw refugee camp.
Ya gidi pudin juna tishka tabur kada param chivit chabi gala biya man shtunga ata sa chodu dum hikapa gira apa wiga mata a ngatsawa ngarama a blok angat ko kwana ngatsawa kwana amma ba ngala anga gangala sunga blok chipa winga nganza chipa mata anda bugiga. Macucu nga gwandari bitsina ɗi ga sun jun ga taci. Ba na ji daɗi a lokacin da an ba mu kaya a cikin ShelterBox. Sorry. Skine projectic doga anda dia anda mishi anda draw agira ampani menga chukcha agi mildina bna rugiga na gina mai kyau na kawo dutse na zo na zuba a ƙarshen ɗakin nan sai na yi gini na mai kyau yanzu nake zama a cikin lafiya da kuma ni akwai abin da yana son gaya musu kuma ni godiya na ne ina gode musu kamar yadda sun ɗau lokacinsu suna kula da mu kowace rana.
ShelterBox's work in the world's most extreme conflict zones is only made possible because of private charitable support. This work never makes the headlines, and it doesn't typically garner the private support that a natural disaster or a very large-scale emergency that dominates the headlines would. But it is absolutely life-saving to families like Kaltumi's. Each year, ShelterBox honors an organization or an individual that is advancing basic human rights, service to the most vulnerable people on the planet, and advancing humanitarian relief globally. Tonight's honoree has been doing that for decades. I first met this couple 7 years ago. I met with them because they had a particular interest in helping to support some of the most vulnerable people in our world. At the time, it was the Syrian refugee crisis. But over the years, they've also turned their attention to some of the poorest places on the planet. They've helped us work in places like Cameroon to help Khartoum receive shelter, as well as new projects like in Yemen. These are people who are making a profound impact on people's lives, people they will never meet, but whose lives they are absolutely transforming. Today, it is my absolute privilege to be able to present the 2022 Global Humanitarian Service Award to a couple that is making a difference every single day. They are a family foundation in the Seattle area, and it is my privilege to present this award to Mike and Joyce Murray.
Well, thank you, Carrie. Joyce and I thank you and ShelterBox for this very special recognition. For almost, as you mentioned, for almost 25 years, our family foundation has focused much of our efforts on helping people in need. And this is because Joyce and I feel compelled to help relieve suffering. We do this by partnering with a variety of smart and effective NGOs and nonprofits throughout the world. And whether it's pervasive poverty or devastation caused by natural disasters or conflict as a result of war, there's always a common denominator, and that is suffering, be it physical, emotional, or spiritual, or perhaps all three. And then it's often accompanied by an engulfing sense of hopelessness. We made our first grant to ShelterBox in 2005 in response to a devastating earthquake in Nepal that killed almost 9,000 and displaced thousands more. And since that first donation, there's been no turning back. We were initially drawn to ShelterBox by the simplicity of the solution, a big green box with all the essentials a family would need to reestablish not just shelter, but a home. A big green box that could be delivered almost anywhere in a timely and professional way. And then we met the team in person, both in the US and in the United Kingdom. We've done our due diligence and we love partnering now with ShelterBox, and we also love partnering and recommending them to our friends. Over the last few years, we've seen the ShelterBox team become very flexible and innovative in their approach to complex refugee situations caused by wars and terrible protracted conflicts. This has drawn us further into their work in places like Yemen, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Syria, and even Cameroon. From their own website come these great words, quote, "Everyone deserves a place to call home. It's a human right and the first step towards recovery after disaster. Shelter is so much more than just a roof. It's the foundation for life, families, and communities. It's a place to feel safe after days or weeks of fear. It offers protection from harsh weather, privacy, and a place to preserve dignity. It's a place to heal from trauma," end of quote. So there you have it, shelter in a box, and now so much more. This is smart, effective giving and receiving. So Joyce and I salute ShelterBox tonight and thank them again for this lovely award, and hope that each of you participating tonight will salute ShelterBox with your own generous support of this great organization. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Joyce, for making the life-saving work of ShelterBox possible. It was an absolute privilege to present you with the 2022 Global Humanitarian Service Award from ShelterBox USA. Once a year, we come together, and this is our third annual Evening to Experience ShelterBox event. While I'm sad that we're not all physically together, I'm absolutely thrilled. We have people all across the world who are participating tonight, as far away as Australia. So tonight is an opportunity to help ShelterBox be ready. This is a year that has been extraordinary. We did not plan on responding to a crisis in Ukraine, We've drawn down on so much of our inventory from our work in Pakistan, our work across the Lake Chad Basin, our work in the Philippines, to our work in Ukraine, and it is time to replenish and stage our pre-positioned items all over the world. We need more tents, tarps, lights. We need to build capacity with our partners on the ground. And now is the time that we ask for your support and help with this life-saving mission. As I mentioned earlier, we have extraordinary donors on the line tonight, and they have pledged a $100,000 match donation for tonight's event. We have a goal of $250,000. And I can see already many of you are making pledges. I see we're already at $80,000. That is absolutely incredible. I see many of you there. Alice Gorlick, thank you so much. Steve Haran, Trish Noble, Amanis, thank you so much for making these pledges and donations. Thank you. Again, you can make a pledge or donation on the lower left-hand side of your screen. So I want to share with you some of the ways that you can make an impact. So what will $250,000 do? Well, that will help us shelter a community. And what that means is when disasters happen, we often travel to the front lines of the disaster. We've been coordinating a response. We conduct assessments. And each response roughly starts at around 2,000 households. That's over 10,000 people. So for $250,000, you can help us shelter a community after a disaster. That's what we can do. So for $100,000, what will ShelterBox do? Well, I showed you those shelter kits. We are deploying thousands of shelter kits now in Ukraine to help people repair their homes and temporarily shelter in place, like the women you saw on the film. We can do 1,000 shelter kits for $100,000. This is absolutely transformative to the lives of the families who've been displaced. There are an infinite number of ways that that shelter kit can be deployed. We see it repair homes that have been damaged, particularly in the Philippines, to creating a single room structure as well for a family. For $50,000, what can we do? Well, behind me, you see shelter boxes, and we can provide 50 shelter boxes, 50 families with a place to call home. That's everything from the standard relief tent to a full cook set, water purification unit, solar lanterns, blankets, a tool set, mosquito nets, everything that a family needs to have a shelter as well as set up a household. For $25,000, we can do 100 of these cook sets that you see here. And when we do monitoring and evaluation, we often hear from families that these cook sets are some of the most valuable things that we provide them with, because meals have a way of restoring a sense of routine or a sense of normalcy for a family that's been displaced. Boiling water, cooking, being able to share a meal. So a full cook set as well as the utensils and materials to serve hot meals to a family. So we can do 100 of these for $25,000. For $10,000, we can do winter warmth. So everything from gloves, hats, scarves, and I'd love to show you even our baby onesies. So in places like Syria that are extraordinarily cold, children can die of exposure. We began doing these several years ago, which are thermal baby onesies. We actually make these in Turkey and we bring them across the border, and our partners help distribute winter warmth. Everything from coats to wellies and boots to these thermal baby onesies. Okay, for $5,000, we can do 250 family hygiene kits. What does that mean? It means everything from soap to wash basins and just essential hygiene supplies for families who've been displaced. For $1,000, you can do one box, and this will be one family that will call this shelter home, usually for a period of weeks to months after a disaster. And for $500, we can send lights to 10 families, these solar lanterns. And this is so crucial. So often in disaster or conflict situations, there's no electricity or power. These are absolutely essential for the families. And then for $100, you can provide a shelter kit. This is what we use to repair the homes or create a single room structure. These are $100 delivered. Again, low cost, very, very high impact for the families. So, before we move to a very, very inspiring video and in person I would want you to meet, I want to say thank you to a few people. Linda Mayer, thank you so much, a ShelterBox ambassador out of Pennsylvania. Thank you for your donation. Leslie, awesome, thank you so much. Thank you, Holly Rickett. Hugh Murphy, thank you so much for your donations. They're still rolling in. I see we're just about 90,000. That's terrific. Oh my goodness. Okay, Jeffrey Catterit, $1,000, amazing. Southern Ulster Rotary, thank you. Mahesh Taraga, member of the ShelterBox board. Nancy Fadigan, ShelterBox ambassador, Old Mission Rotary, thank you so much. Catherine Stack, thank you so much. That's for that really incredible donation. Mark Piersma, thank you. Carol Gaba, Greg and Shannon Goddison, thank you so much for your donation. That's awesome. Andrew Morse, thank you. Louis Turpin from the Rhinebeck, New York Rotary. Awesome. Thank you for representing Rhinebeck. I want to turn our attention now to someone who is really making an extraordinary difference in the world in so many ways. I am a huge believer that everyone has something to contribute. And what I love when people combine their passion with their purpose. And over the past year, I couldn't think of a better person to highlight tonight than someone who's truly gone the distance for this organization and for the families we serve all across the world. His name is Stephen Tonkinson, and several years ago, Stephen became a ShelterBox response team member. He passed the program. He's deployed to the front lines of disaster situations and conflicts all over the world. And in addition to serving as a frontline response team member, Stephen also became a member of the ShelterBox board of directors. He has a very busy daytime finance practice that he is managing, but he finds a lot of time to serve. But this year, he wanted to do something different. Stephen signed up to become our first ShelterBox adventurer, a person who's combining their passion with their purpose. And Stephen has oftentimes run the marathon with a ShelterBox box on his back, but he wanted to do something a little bit different. He wanted to climb the vertical elevation of Everest with a box on his back. So he did just that. Late this summer, Stephen completed the Everesting Challenge, climbing 29,029 feet on behalf of ShelterBox, and he raised over $60,000. Now, it's my absolute privilege to introduce to you ShelterBox response team member, ShelterBox board member, and now ShelterBox adventurer, Stephen Tonkinson from Miami, Florida.
What is the why? Well, the why is because I've been involved with ShelterBox now since 2008. First as a response team member, and then a volunteer and ambassador, and now a board member. And I know firsthand the value and importance of what we do. And I thought it'd be really important to raise awareness and expose people to what ShelterBox has been doing all these years, helping all these families out. This is one way I figured it'd be pretty cool and different way to, get people to learn about ShelterBox and maybe get them to want to be involved, whether it is a volunteer, an ambassador, or look to become a board member, or just spread the word about what we're doing. Because the thing is that there's over 130 million people displaced right now, and that number seems to be growing with every natural disaster or war or conflict or drought that's impacting our world. And I think it's important that we know that there are organizations out there like ShelterBox that are helping those that have lost their home after these types of occurrences, and that they can help out and participate and be involved in trying to help those families out in those situations. But we need to think more globally and be a global community and be able to respond to our global community's needs. And I think ShelterBox does that. They do it in a really special, specific way, and one that I think is very important. I hope you guys are able to find that connection, want to be involved, want to participate, you know, help move that needle to try and make that difference. Anyway, that's the why. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And you have made our work at ShelterBox possible with so many ways that you serve. If you're interested in becoming a ShelterBox ambassador, a ShelterBox response team member, or even a ShelterBox adventurer, you can find more information on our volunteer programs on the website at shelterboxusa.org. A big thank you. We've had several donors from all over the world. Thank you, Peter Mulford, Andrew Morse from New York, Jim Carrier up in Oakland. Thank you so much, Jim. Jim's also one of our amazing ShelterBox ambassadors that has raised over $400,000 over the years through his service. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Eric Reese, another one of our amazing ShelterBox ambassadors up in the Pacific Northwest, and Becky Saltzman. Thank you so much. Brad, thank you for your major donation. That's amazing. It's incredible. This takes a village to do this global humanitarian work. And we know that the first step in the recovery process for these families is having the basic things that they need to call home. Thank you, Margarita Tonkinson. That's amazing. Thank you. That is Stephen's mother. That's incredible. Thank you, Margarita. Someone was asking me, what are my favorite aid items? Well, I have several favorite aid items that we deploy. One, these stainless steel cook sets. You just see how important that these are in restoring routine for families. Obviously, our ShelterBox lights as well. These are absolutely crucial for these communities, and particularly for women. We couldn't do this work without the humanitarian support from people all across the world, and it's been amazing. Thank you, Sherry Ball. That's amazing. It's great to have you on tonight from Pennsylvania. That's awesome. Thank you. We are nearing our way there. Carrie Baptista, where are we in the night? 201,000. 201,000. That's incredible. That's awesome. Thank you. We're well on our way to $250,000 in being able to shelter a community that's been displaced and lost everything by disaster and conflict situations. I just want to say a big thank you to the entire team here, all of the staff who have been making this work possible all day preparing for this. Thank you, Wesley, Aubrey, Jeremy, Carrie. They're behind the scenes getting this work done. It's been an absolute privilege to work for this organization and see the transformation of the work that we do. As I mentioned, we have brought emergency shelter to 2.5 million people over nearly 23 years. When our founders first got started in that Gujarat earthquake, they had hoped to help a few dozen people a year. That was their goal. And over time, we have slowly been able to grow and expand, all through private charitable support. And it took us 15 years to reach the first 1 million people. And it took us 5 years to reach the second million. And that's because of the charitable support from all of you. So many of you have been long-term volunteers, long-term ambassadors. Many of you are Rotarians, and you have made this global service work possible. I cannot thank you enough. I have a few more that are coming in. Thank you, Sue and Bill O'Malley. Oh my goodness, that's a major donation. Thank you so much. Thank you. We are going to continue to keep the lines open. you'll be able to continue to make a pledge. And if you're making a pledge and it's a larger gift and you would like to either wire or send a check, that is fine. You don't have to check out. Just pledge it within the app and we will follow up with you later. Also, you can also make the donations and check out right online through the Paybe app as well. It's very easy to do that. So it's just, we're going to keep it on all night. The goal is $250,000. We are almost there. Team, where are we right now? We're at 211. 211,000. Amazing. Just incredible. Thank you so much. This work is really meaningful to all of us, and you are a major participant in making the work of ShelterBox possible. Again, I want to say a big thank you to all the volunteers across the world. For all of you who are attending tonight, we know that there is a lot happening in our world, including a World Series that you could be watching, but you're here and you care so much about the global humanitarian work of ShelterBox, and it's really, really meaningful. So we're going to continue to leave the lines open. You can also make a donation straight online at shelterboxusa.org. And thank you so much for being here for our 3rd annual Evening to Experience ShelterBox virtual event. We'll see you next year.